Hey, welcome to our final video in a 5-part series about the shoulder. Let's start off real quick by revisiting the test that I had you do in the very first video. So reach out to the side, turn your thumbs down, and then try to reach over your own head. Most likely this is impossible. Most likely you're going to feel some compression in the side of your shoulders. However, when you turn your thumbs up, you're externally rotating the humerus, try to reach over your head. I guarantee you can get a lot more motion when you did that. Now, this led us to think first, oh, you've got to externally rotate. But unfortunately, when we actually tried to do that, we tried to keep our maximum external rotation while reaching overhead. We couldn't do it. So then we're like, do we need to internally rotate? What do we do? We're going to make sense of that in today's video. Real quick, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel for future notifications on videos like this. And again, if you haven't watched the first 4 videos, I'm going to be flying through that content and not talking about the depth of it at all. I'm just going to try and make sense of information that we already discussed in depth. So go back and watch that stuff if you haven't seen it already. Okay, let's put this stuff together. So when we started off in our first video, we talked about compression. And what we discovered was that when you reach over your head, we have sort of a difficulty in motion sometimes for some people because of compression of the subacromial space. There's some stuff in there, it's squishy, sometimes it gets pissed off and irritated, and then you have even more difficulty reaching overhead. And we discovered that when you externally rotate the arm, it kind of spins that stuff backwards and out of the way, and it clears some room for motion. So this proved to us, along with the test that we did with our thumbs down, can't reach up, thumbs up, you can reach up. This proved to us that you must externally rotate to some degree when you're reaching overhead. However, then we talked about torque. We said, okay, well, if we externally rotate as much as humanly possible and try to reach overhead, we can't do it. So that's because of torque. Now, torque was just a rotational force. If you have too much of it, you cannot you can't really move the joint. But it's important to have some of it because it stabilizes your joint. So where's the balance? How do we get enough torque to have a really nice and strong and stable joint, but not so much that we can't move our joint? So we looked at this. We looked at this rotational spectrum, and we found that the more we go into internal rotation overhead, the more we are compressing that joint, and it just becomes impossible, right? Look at this guy right here. This is impossible. Nobody can do this with their arms. That's just impossible, okay? So all of this is nonsense. And then unfortunately, because of the test with the block where we reached over our head, we also discovered that maximal external rotation was impossible as well. So we found a Goldilocks zone. We found that, come on. There we go. Okay, so we found this Goldilocks zone where we need to have some external rotation and we can kind of ride the torque so we achieve a lot of stability, but we don't want to do it so much that it limits our overhead motion completely. So we need to get the motion and then lock in the torque. This is a bell curve. Everything that we've talked about is something that exists on a bell curve. Now, what that means, a bell curve is something where in the center of the curve, you have these are all like people. These are all individual people. And most people are going to perform the best, pretty similarly. Most people are going to be there. However, on either sides of the bell curve, as you move away from the center of the spectrum, or in our case, if you move away from our Goldilocks zone into internal rotation or external rotation, then fewer and fewer people are going to be able to actually perform that activity. And there's always going to be some weird outlier, like way over here and way over here. But generally, for most people, they're going to be in the bell curve. Okay, so there's no such thing as one size fits all, but we can tailor our approaches to generally be good for most people, and then just leave our willingness to adapt if it doesn't work for somebody. Okay. In other words, don't just say this exact place is the only place, realize that there's a spectrum, but yes, we can get most people by aiming for the center. So this is where our bell curve lands for rotation overhead. Okay, is somewhere in between fully externally rotated and neutral. Then we discovered that the scapula can lift up, and that can create space, so that with the angle changing and pointing the glenoid up, then we have more room to reach up. We talked about scapulohumeral rhythm, and we discovered that wherever we reach the arm, we should just let the shoulder blade go ahead and follow it. And that's going to allow for natural freedom of motion, alignment of that joint, centration of the joint head, and minimal tension on the front, back sides, compression of the acromial space, etc. So we can alleviate some compressive issues, especially with just allow the shoulder blade to move with the arm. Here was a picture of that. We proved it. We showed that as you reach up, the scapula does indeed move out, and then it moves forward and up. So we should allow for that movement. And then we talked about the possible directions that we can reach. Do we want to reach out and up? Do we want to reach forward and up? Or do we want to split the difference and move in the scapular plane? And we showed that how when you reach out to the side, you kind of pinch. You might end up kind of pinching the subacromial space. It's not a bad thing for everybody, but if you already get irritable, when you're overhead, abduction is going to be the hardest and most compressive path. Flexion would be the second most challenging path. The difficulty here would be that you would have a lot of stretching of the musculature and ligaments on the back, and then you have compression on the front side and the front labrum. So if you have some difficulty, this can help you to know where the tension and where the compression is. And in flexion, we notice that when you reach forward and up, the subacromial space, the stuff in there kind of rolls backwards and out of the way. Whereas this is a front view, when we reach to the side and up, the stuff in the subacromial space kind of tries to move towards the scapula, but there's nowhere to go and it gets squished. Okay, not a big deal for most people, but if you're having trouble already, then this additional compression might make it harder for you. So we discovered that because of a bell curve where most people are in the center, and then there's, diminishing kind of returns out to the side, and then there's going to be some outliers, that generally speaking, Scaption allows for a balance of tension and compression on both the front and the back sides of the shoulder. That's all the muscles, the ligaments, the labrum, etc. And so Scaption is a really good regression. It's a good place to start, but you shouldn't end there. You should just start there and then try to advance into more range of motion, because you should be able to reach forward. You should be able to reach to the side. You should be able to split the difference. It should all be possible. But if you're having trouble, then we can start with Scaption. Here I turned the bell curve so it was actually facing. So most of the people are in here, and then fewer people can move towards the flexion, fewer can move towards the abduction. Okay, so I hope the bell curve kind of makes that simpler for you. So the main points, how do we put this all together? Let's put it together. All right. So the main points are, we want to externally rotate when we reach overhead. You actually have to, but you don't have to do it 100%, because that's actually impossible as well. So split the difference and ride the torque. Ride the torque, right? Because we want the stability of the torque, especially when we're like doing handstands or weightlifting overhead. But you need to allow yourself to back away from that torque enough to gain the range of motion. Okay, so ride the torque, try to get as much as you can, but realize that it's impossible to reach the end of the spectrum there. Scapulohumeral rhythm, follow the leader. Wherever the arm goes, the shoulder blade goes, and that's going to create space. Scaption is the easiest motion, but it's not the only motion. It's a great place to start for people who are having difficulty with certain motions. And hopefully through repeated scaption, you emphasize motions in scaption. You get used to moving that way. You get strong moving in that way. Then eventually you can advance to other paths of motion. So if you combine all of these and you realize that it exists on a bell curve, that all of these things apply to most people, we can still leave some room that, some people are way over here on the bell curve. Some people are going to be a little unusual, and that's okay. So we can start from this stuff, but this is just a starting place. This is not the end all be all, one size fits all solution. It's just a good place to start. If we put that all together into a pose, downward facing dog, we see that we let the scapula move forward and up. We externally rotate the arms so that they spin out of the way. The greater tubercles get out of the way. We create some space in the subacromial space. We can take the path of flexion, which you naturally do if you're moving from a plank position to a downward facing dog. You naturally are forced to take a path of flexion, which is easier than abduction. And that's all the main points there. So I hope this puts it together. I hope this allows you to see how tension and compression and scapular motion and the path that you choose to take, all of these things are going to impact how you reach overhead. And you need to balance. It's a balancing act. You don't just only care about compression. And I'd like to remind you that compression and tension are both good things, okay? We need compression to build strong bones. We need tension to build strong muscles. Tension and compression are very good and necessary things. However, sometimes they can get in the way. So this should allow you all the tools that you need to have to balance those forces and make good choices. So like this video, subscribe to my channel. If you haven't watched the other videos in the series, go back and get some more details. Comment, ask about poses, talk about things, tell me how this is related to your own practice. And I'll see you in the next episode.